All right, Brandon again, and not in the basement for once. I'm at my computer. Figured I'd do a video talking about a new bar released from Rogue and why I'm buying it and some things to consider that excite me. And if you like these kind of videos, let me know in the comments section below. I'll be sure to do more of them because they're super easy to do and you don't have to look at my face, which I think a lot of people would probably appreciate. So the new bar itself, also known as the Double T bar, is the 38mm Buffalo bar called the Rogue CB-4. Now, I'm not sure why they don't designate this the Double T bar here, although they did when they debuted it at the Arnold. So I'm going to go ahead and just show some clips of that in use. And Double T stands for Terry Todd, a strength enthusiast and pioneer, set up a PhD program at the University of Texas. Really great, him and his wife, and Rogue has a documentary on them if you haven't seen it. Give it a watch. Really into strength training, and Terry's done a lot for the strength community, so they named this bar after him, which is pretty cool. Now, one of the other things that's really cool about this bar in general is Rogue does a lot of strongman stuff as of late, and as you can see in these clips, they're actually squatting in one of the new Rogue 4x4 racks that also has a built-in monolift, and they're using these Arnold specific plates that they've made that are really cool that Coop has a pair of. And the thing is with this is typically when Rogue does a lot of these events, especially special events like this, they don't actually ever release the equipment that's used. They're kind of like one and dones and only used for these competitions. So the fact that they have thus released this bar, the CB-4, I'm super excited about, and I hope it sets a trend. Now, speaking of trends, they've also recently released some of these new multi-grip bars, which you guys have probably seen as they've been pretty heavily promoted in things like Instagram. And I'm not going to be getting either of these because I have no interest, but I'm glad to see Rogue addressing a lot of the specialty bars that they have because they haven't showed a lot of love that way to them in many years. Now, if they would only redo their safety squat bar, I think they'd really be putting a good step forward. So we're going to talk about the CB-4 today and also how it compares to the Duffalo bar, which I also have on screen, which I've owned 2 Duffalo bars in my life. I currently have a black oxide version, and it is awesome. But I'm still going to be getting this new Rogue bar, comparing the two and letting you know which one I think is better because there are some pretty big differences between these. But the Duffalo, by far, the cream of the crop. There's other competitors that make bars out there which are much more affordable, but they're also at a much lower quality in my experience. So first, let's talk about the Rogue CB-4 Double T bar. I think the first thing that catches people's eye is the look of it. So this is an all black bar. It looks sick, nasty. Unfortunately, it's made with black Cerakote, and I just made a video talking about how I don't like Cerakote finishes, and I don't even like some of the pictures they use in their production photos because this looks really rough to me. Not really a big fan of that, and I wish they would offer a different finish, even a bare steel option if they would, because Cerakote is a process that takes time to do, so they wouldn't have to do that, number one. Number two, it would also make the bar feel much better in my opinion because Cerakote definitely dulls the feel of the bar. It also adds to the cost. Now, speaking of cost, this bar is going to retail for $495. And I know what you're thinking, Brandon, that's a lot of cash, a lot of money. I can't afford $495. And I agree, $500 for a barbell is expensive, but in comparison and in context, I think it's actually really, really competitively priced. I say that because the Duffalo bar, which again, in my opinion, is the cream of the crop as of the time of making this video, you're looking at least $620 just for the bar itself. Potentially looking at more depending on which finish you get. I believe the most expensive finish is typically the nickel, which I think retails for around, I want to say $680 or $699. Regardless, it's much more than the Rogue bar. And then once you figure in taxes, that's going to add some money. And shipping, Kabuki is usually not as price friendly when it comes to shipping as Rogue is. So you're probably looking at somewhere between $50 to $100 to ship the Kabuki. And you're probably looking at $50 or less to ship the Rogue. To get the Kabuki Duffalo bar, you're probably looking at somewhere between $700 and $800, conservatively speaking. Versus this would probably come in, I'm assuming with taxes and shipping, my guess is like $575. So you're talking about potentially like $200 more for the Kabuki version. That, my friends, is why I think the $495 is actually pretty decently priced. So let's talk about some of the other specs on here. I'm just going to come down here to the gear specs, talk about these in general. We'll run through them. Lifetime warranty, great. Made in USA, great. Loadable sleeve length is 16 inches. compared to the Kabuki over here, which is 17.5. So you can load more on the Kabuki. But truth be told, even if you look at someone like Chris Duffin squatting with this Duffalo bar, here he is squatting 800 pounds using hundos, using lots of plates. This is more than I would ever load. There is still plenty of room on this barbell. So unless you're using like crumb bumpers or something like that, or you're squatting like 1,000 pounds, I really don't think that 1.5 inch difference on either side is really going to make too much of a difference overall. Moving on to the next thing, the bar length, 95 inches on the Rogue, 95 inches on the Kabuki. So they're actually the exact same length. Now, if you take a look at the Kabuki, however, you take a look at their sleeves here, they are pretty thick collars, very similar to what you find on like a Texas bar, for example. So they're pretty thick. The Rogue version, on the other hand, as you can see here, let's see if they have a better picture, they're pretty thin. So because, number one, the sleeves, you can't load them as much by about 1.5 inches on either side, about 3 inches total. The collars are definitely thinner. The distance between the weights on the Rogue ends up being about 60.75 inches. The distance on the Kabuki, although it's not listed on here, I measured the one I own, is about 56 inches. So you get about 4 inches more in between the actual collars here on the Rogue bar, which normally I would say is probably going to lead this bar to be a little bit more whippy. But one of the things I want to call out is this bar, the Rogue, is 38 millimeters in diameter. It's a thick boy. Now, even the Kabuki at 31.75 or roughly 32 millimeters, which is your average squat bar size, which most people would say is very thick, considering a normal power bar is 29 millimeters. This is a big boy, and you can definitely see again in some of these videos that I was showing earlier. Let me pull up some of these clips of these people. These strongmen are huge. They're all like, 6'4" to 6'7". They weigh like at least 300 pounds in most cases. And this is a thick boy barbell. I'm really excited about that. I actually really like thicker, girthier bars, surprisingly enough, especially on my back. I like integrating them because it's just different, right? I mean, I have a lot of barbells as is, and most bars are like 29 to 32 millimeters as a thicker squat bar. So this is extremely different. This is like more closer to almost axle territory, which I think is pretty cool because again, it's different enough where no other real Buffalo style bar is like this on the market currently. So I'm really excited about that. And I think that's going to be cool. Not to say that I need more than 32 millimeters, but to my main point, since this is 38, the fact that you're going to have more of a distance between the sleeves and collars isn't going to be that big of a difference. As you can tell by, in this case, let me go back to the video again, you see someone like Karen from Canada here squatting like 900 pounds, I think this ended up being. And the bar's not moving. I mean, there's no whip on that bar as is. So I don't think it's going to be a big issue for anybody out there. Now, speaking of that, though, one of the other stats I want to pull out, as you can see here, and you can probably tell from some of these pictures, the actual bend in the Rogue bar is more significant, I would say, by much in terms of the Kabuki bar. So the difference between the top to where the weights are on the Rogue is about 4.4 inches. The difference in the Kabuki is, it's listed on here, but you have to dig for it a little bit. It's about 2.5 inches of a difference. So you're getting about 2 inch more of a drop between the two. And what I find this is going to do for people actually using it is this bar is going to tend to wrap around you a little bit more. Let me see if I can find a good picture, maybe if someone's squatting from the side here, and I'll come back a little bit and maybe we can play some of this and get a good idea. So you can kind of see it in some of these. Here's a good example. So the weight's actually going to be a little bit more further forward with the weight distribution versus something like the Duffalo. While it's still going to be forward, but since it's not as bent, it's not going to be as forward, if that makes sense. So I think in terms of the weight distribution, this is going to probably be a little bit of a harder lift. This is going to be putting more towards your center, almost like a safety squat bar, for example. And while this is still going to be more forward than a normal low bar squat, the Kabuki version will probably be a little bit less so. So it will probably be a little bit easier in terms of adapting to going from a low bar squat to a Duffalo bar squat on this. Now, with the bend too, one of the things that's going to play a role in is the fact that this will probably be slightly easier on people's shoulders. Again, because the bend's more significant, so your hands are going to be able to go lower. They're not going to have to go as far back. But that's really splitting hairs here because this is already extremely comfortable to squat with due to the bend in the bar position. This one will just be more so, but again, probably not much of a significance for many people out there, unless you have severe shoulder issues. And to be honest, most people I know that buy Duffalo bars aren't because they have shoulder issues. It's just because they want a really cool specialty bar. So there's that as well. Going back to the specs here, it's powerlifting, bushings. This bar weighs 60 pounds compared to the Kabuki, which weighs 55 pounds. Again, it's likely due to that girth as both bars are the same size. Powerlifting knurl type, center knurl, both of them have it. They both have the center knurl mark in the middle. The Rogue has that as well, as you can see. So very visually similar in that regard. One of the things I want to talk about though is the actual knurl type. So it lists this as having aggressive knurling. As you can see right here, the Kabuki lists it as sharp. So if I were to pixel peep, because unfortunately Rogue doesn't have any real super close-ups of this particular knurling type, this looks very similar to me like probably the Agro 2X. It doesn't look as deeply cut as, let's say, like their normal Ohio Power Bar. However, it still is definitely more of a volcano type versus the Kabuki, which again doesn't have any good knurl picks here, but I'll show you an example of mine. My black oxide Kabuki bar is super sharp and probably the most aggressive bar that I own, because not only is it sharp, but those mountains are packed in really tight together, so they really dig in, really give you fantastic grip. So I'm assuming that the Kabuki is going to feel better overall for me, especially because, again, this is a black Cerakote version, so I'm not a big fan of the Cerakote because it does null the feel. So I think the Kabuki will be better in that regard, but still excited to get this on because it's not the same as just an Ohio Power Bar type knurl, at least from the looks. And I'll give you some close-up shots when I actually end up getting one of these things. Other than that, the main differences between these two, I think, is the availability options, right? We talked about the price. With the Rogue, even though right now it hasn't actually been released, there is a notify me button here, which I signed up for previously, which I don't know why I'm not signed up, but I'll do that again because I'm sure I'll figure it out before they actually let you know that it's up and running. Rogue typically has better availability, generally speaking, than Kabuki. You can see here Kabuki, even though they offer different finishes like zinc, black oxide, and nickel, the thing is you're going to wait a minimum of 9 weeks for the black oxide, up to 17 weeks for the zinc. And to be honest, I've found with Kabuki, they usually miss these delivery deadlines. So they'll tell you 17 weeks and it might be 20 weeks. It might be 24 weeks. It might be 8 months. I've seen that happen to people recently with some of the power bars and the deadlift bars, just delays, things that they can't necessarily control, but they are notoriously bad for missing these kind of spec times and when this stuff will be available. Versus Rogue, typically they come in stock fairly often-ish, I would say. Definitely not this long, but it's just one of those things to pay attention to, as well as the actual price. Like I said on the Duffalo bar is probably going to end up costing you a couple of $100 more. Now, it's not to say the Duffalo bar is bad by any means. Again, I love this bar, but I think the Rogue is different enough where I want to try it, again, given the price point. It'll also make, I think, for an interesting comparison video to see really if there's a difference. And this might be a more attractive price point to people to get into the game. Even though there are other companies that make Buffalo style bars, I do think the Kabuki, like I said, is worth the money over them. However, if Rogue can come in with something comparable at a much lower price with also some key differentiators that I think make it stand out above the normal ones, I think they potentially have a really good product here. And that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to actually pick one up whenever it's available. Now, the question is, do you think it's interesting enough? Let me know in the comment section below. Will you be buying one? Does this interest you at all? What are your thoughts? And if you like these kind of videos, let me know that too, because these are super simple to do in terms of just talking about what equipment's out there and my general thoughts on it. If there's something specifically you want me to do a video on, let me know in the comment section below as well. But in the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and stay big.